Hello, and thank you all for tuning in to another episode of the MP Sanders podcast. So, this episode is going to talk about political extremism. And this one took a little bit longer to write out because I really wanted to make sure that I was getting these things right, or as right as I can. I'm no political science major, I'm a geoscience major, and I have like 70% of a chemistry degree that focuses in pharmacology. I'm a scientist. But like I said in the last episode, I really want to start branching out into more like philosophical discussions with this podcast. But there's something I want to make clear before I really start this episode and start reading off the script, and it's that I criticize both sides of the political spectrum in this episode, and virtually every time I talk about politics. And there's a problem I've noticed with people who do that, and they tend to do so from this attitude of I'm smarter than you because I'm criticizing both sides and I'm not picking a side. And I just want to make clear that that is not my motivation behind doing so. I talk a little bit about this in the towards the end of this podcast, but I do it because I genuinely feel true political isolation. And a big part of that does come from being a drug legalization advocate because that's a unanimously no one agrees with that on the left or right. It's a select couple of people that all tend to be in this weird mix of in the middle where they have just criticisms of both sides. And so I just wanted to point that out before I start this. My criticism of the right is not me saying I'm smarter than people on the right for not subscribing to that philosophy or ideology. And the same is true of the left. I don't think I'm more intelligent than anyone. I think that we all have our own ways of constructing our beliefs and what we subscribe to. And the way I have constructed mine as of now doesn't really line up with either side of the political spectrum at the moment. And hopefully that can change in the future and that my beliefs will become more compatible with someone that is actually running for office or in a position of power. So just wanted to make that clear. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll go ahead and get started. The political atmosphere in the US has continued to grow more and more polarized over recent years. I believe we saw a culmination of that with the assassination of Charlie Kirk a few days ago. However, there are far more concerning aspects of what is occurring than that tragic death. In this episode, I'm going to discuss what our current road is leading to on both sides of the political spectrum. There's been a strong push, particularly in the past 10 years or so, toward the abandonment of individualism and the introduction of group thinking. People refer to this as identity politics, but I think that phrase has become more of a virtue signal rather than an actual description of something, so I will not use it, nor will I use the word woke to describe anything. This push is occurring on both sides, and there's reluctance to admit that on both sides. The right and left both think that all of the polarization and radicalization is taking place because of them rather than us. It takes two to polarize a society. A good portion of it is occurring for the same reasons as well. Our society is seemingly struggling right now. There's significant social unrest, the economy has been shaky, prices are high, livable wages aren't necessarily guaranteed. Both sides want to fix these issues, and many others, and both sides think the other is responsible. The interesting part is that both sides are correct and wrong at the same time with various things that they say. For example, it is true that not valuing the nuclear family is harmful to society. The data on that are crystal clear. It is also true that the collection of wealth at the top is damaging to society. The data on that are also crystal clear. Those are two basic arguments made from the left and right. The right say that the left want to destroy the nuclear family, and the left say that the right wants to pander to the ultra wealthy. At what point, though, does the right and left go too far and become destructive? I think we're witnessing the beginning of that right now. There is a clarification I want to make, though. I do not believe that the majority of people on the left or right have gone too far with their ideologies. Data show that around 80% of Americans are moderates. It is the 10% on both sides that are showing concerning signs. However, I think that more and more people are being pushed to that extreme, and if we don't figure this polarization issue out pretty soon, there could be a United States where only 20% of people are moderates and the rest are extremists. And of course, that means extremists compared to US norms. In the process of writing this, I talked to my buddy who is a political science major, and he pointed something pretty potent out, and it's that Bernie Sanders is pretty much considered an extremist here, but he would not be considered an extremist at all in France. So I am specifically referring to policies and extremism relative to what takes place in the US historically. So we'll continue. A great indicator of when the right goes too far is when race is a core component of the political ideology. This has been growing in number. The left pulls this card as well, but in a much different way. When the left refers to racism, they are accusing the racists of pinning down the minorities to the point where they cannot prosper. When the right starts going down this path, they are accusing the minorities of being detrimental to society. This was obviously on display in Nazi Germany. A horrible fact about Hitler that really shows how deep his disgust for Jews went is that he went on a Beautify Germany campaign when he first rose to power. He planted flowers outside the factories and ordered these factories and businesses to kill all of the rats that they could by using Zyklon B gas. That is the exact gas that he used in the gas chambers to kill the Jews. He viewed rats and Jews in the same way. He called them both carriers of the plague in his journal, for example, and did literally commonly refer to Jews as rats. And that went so deep that he was using the same substance to kill them both whenever he went on these missions to clean up his country. That that's how deep the disgust went. And I've always found that one like particularly disturbing. This is obviously a case of when racially charged political ideologies are pushed to their maximum. However, it shouldn't have to get to that point before we start sounding alarms. And the point of this episode is to try to point out when the alarm should be sounded. And right now, it is not hard to find right wing pundits displaying open anti Semitism, whether it's Marjorie Taylor Greene saying Jewish space lasers are being used to cause the destructive wildfires in California, or Candace Owens saying that Israel is a safe haven for pedophiles and that modern Zionists are satanic and that they killed JFK. It's not hard to find at all. There are dozens of right wing content creators saying that Jews are destroying our society and are sowing disorder. This is a clear step in the direction of racially charged political ideology. These aren't small content creators or trolls on Twitter either. Candace Owens has a massive audience. And the fact that she has kept that audience after saying things like this indicates that there are a growing number of people on the right willing to engage in racially charged ideology. Any move in that direction at all is extremism. The issue continues to grow when the ideology can be rationalized in some way. It is an unfortunate truth that black people disproportionately commit violent crime relative to their population. Instead of acknowledging the cultural issues that underlie that, race-based ideology assumes it has something to do with skin pigment. Even if they do acknowledge the cultural issue, they use that cultural issue as a way to excuse their race-based ideology. Instead of trying to address what causes culture to form, they advocate for ostracizing the people within it. They are not yet calling for the extermination of these groups, but it can be guaranteed if this path is continued to be waltzed down, those calls will start to appear, and they will probably be taken more seriously than people are ready to acknowledge. Now, on to another example of where the line needs to be drawn on the right is election denial. If it were up to me, Donald Trump would not have been able to run for president in 2024. Not because of the incident at the Capitol building, but because of a phone call he made to a Georgia elector. Luckily, that phone call was recorded.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, Brad and Ryan and everybody. We appreciate the time and the call. So we've spent a lot of time on this, and if we could just go over some of the numbers, I think it's pretty clear that we won. We won very substantially, Georgia. You even see it by rally size, frankly. We'd be getting 25, 30,000 people a rally, and the competition would get less than 100 people, and it never made sense.
Now, this first claim he makes in the phone call, where he knows that he substantially won the state of Georgia due to rally size, is complete and utter nonsense. Donald Trump is great at rallies. His rallies are entertaining because he is entertaining. In no way is that a reliable unit of measurement for votes received, nor is it reliable to use as a predictor for the amount of votes you'll receive. Just because people weren't willing to drive to go to listen to Joe Biden ramble and Kamala Harris fake a new accent doesn't mean people weren't willing to go out and vote for them. Clearly, because they did go out and vote for them, and they won. He then claims that if the electors looked, they would find a couple 100,000 forged signatures. His evidence for that is non existent. Trump has had battles in court over this election and the claim that there was fraud to the extent that it caused him to lose it. He has lost all of those cases, just as he did the 2020 election. Political commentators on the right, politicians on the right, and the general population on the right are supposed to be the anti-victim mindset people. You know, the personal accountability, pick yourself up by your bootstraps, that kind of stuff. So it was rather surprising to see Donald Trump, someone who is very much of that mindset according to his words and attitude, adopt the victim mentality he supposedly despises. He didn't lose the election, apparently. Someone stole it from him. It wasn't his fault he lost. It wasn't that more people thought Biden fit to run the country more effectively, but it was that someone cheated. This phone call lasted over an hour. The electors told him they believe they have an accurate election. He told them they don't. He repeatedly said the only reason this has happened is due to incompetence or dishonesty. This hour-long phone call of him trying everything he can to pressure them into recounting the vote, overturn the results, claim fraud where there wasn't an abnormal amount of it, is a clear attempt at challenging and attempting to change the results of a democratic process. Now, I said that this phone call alone should have been enough reason to bar him from running again. That is my opinion. My opinion on that doesn't ultimately matter, because we do live in a democratic republic, and I'm able to acknowledge that. The majority of voters in 2024 decided that they wanted Donald Trump in office, which is their right. And by that coin, it is his right to be in office. The issue, the bigger issue besides Trump attempting to do this, is that we as a society were willing to look past this obvious infringement, this obvious stepping over the line to extremism, and elect him again. What exactly does that say about the opposition? How are they able to lose to someone with this track record? Someone who was found guilty of sexual abuse in civil court, someone who spent an hour with an elector trying to change the results of an election, someone who's been charged with more than 30 felonies. The most concerning part of this is what comes next. If we are willing to overlook this infringement today, what are we going to overlook in the future? As polarization continues to grow and as radicalization follows, politicians, with the help of their supporters, will begin to justify more and more extreme means to make their ends meet. By that same coin, the ends will continue to become more and more radical as well, because that is the rational step in a polarized society. If the right can continue to convince themselves that all ails of society are on the left, the things they are willing to do to combat the left will continue to grow more harsh. We are not on a good road right now on the right. So to recap, the right should start drawing lines now. The first line needs to be around racially charged ideology. The second line needs to be drawn at election denial. The inability to do this is a massive disservice to conservative philosophy. Conservatives should not have a hard time with this, but they do. And I think there are multiple reasons for that. First being Trump is a charismatic person that has a lot of redeeming qualities in the eyes of his supporters. He's a nationalist. I wouldn't call him an extreme nationalist, but there's still time. He campaigned on fixing the economy, closing the border, deporting illegal immigrants, bringing back law and order, and many other things that people resonate with. He was rather transparent during his campaign as well. He went on Joe Rogan's podcast and spoke for around 3 hours with no script, which is something every politician would benefit from because it forces them to speak like a human. He promised to put America first on both economic and social levels. He was able to make people who generally have no interest in economics extremely interested in the subject because he was pointing out how many trade deals we are a part of that are unfair to the country. The other side is that there was no other Republican candidate that campaigned as effectively on these topics. Certainly none of them with the pull that Trump has. There's a very lazy argument that I hear often, and it's that the only reason he won is because of racist, sexist people, and that there is very little political ideology involved. I can't describe how many videos of black women I saw crying saying, "Y'all really hate me this much?" It's like that. No, that's not why these people elected him. It's not they aren't thinking about you. I live in Arkansas. I'm surrounded by Trump supporters. My girlfriend is a Trump supporter. I talk to these people all the time. That's not even crossing their minds. They're convinced that our society is in trouble and that Trump is the way out. And oversimplifying it to this racist, bigoted stuff is doing a disservice to you as a liberal and leftist. And an issue with doing that is that if you boil your competition down to nothing more than sexist racists, then you can convince yourself that you don't have to campaign on anything other than keeping that person out of office, which is ultimately all the Democrats campaigned on during this last cycle. Failing to recognize the ideological components of Trump is decreasing the likelihood of a successful Democratic Party because they don't know what to counter, because they aren't paying attention. The reason the right was able to look past election denial is because they felt like they had no other option. The reason why they are willing to look past the racial component growing in their philosophy is also rather simple. As I said, there's a general consensus that our society is struggling right now, and that people aren't happy with the state of the country. There is debate about what caused this, but not too much debate about it existing. When society is in that state, being able to point a finger at a specific enemy becomes easy, comfortable, and relieving. Now, it is the responsibility of right leaning people to draw their line at that type of rhetoric, and it needs to happen now. Now, let's shift gears, and I want to try to analyze what happens when the left goes too far. There are very similar components, but they are used in very different ways. Instead of focusing on race, they tend to focus more on class. The left do use the race card quite often, but they're ultimately making a class argument for the most part. Their racial component insists that oppression is the root cause of any type of economic inequality. And there's also this component of, I mentioned the disproportionate number or disproportionate violent crime relative to the population in the black community. They will use economic inequality as an explanation for that. So it's because that all the wealth is hoarding at the top and these people don't have good education and health care and opportunities. And if some of that money was redistributed down to these communities, perhaps less of this would happen. And I do think that that's a pretty valid way of looking at it, but I think it's oversimplified pretty badly. And I'll get into that here in just a second. And the truth is that there is plenty of oppression in the past, present, and there will be in the future. However, looking at society through that black and white lens leads to proposed solutions that are harmful to society because they don't account for the vast majority of human nature and they don't account for the actual causes of some of these things. A great example of this class struggle view of the world pushed to its extreme is the USSR. There is so much that went wrong due to this abhorrently flawed way of looking at society that it is hard to find a place to start. However, I think the kulaks are a pretty good example. To start, first, the USSR was a country that attempted to usher in communism. They didn't make it past the socialism phase, for obvious reasons, that I will line out here. The government attempted to create a society where there was no oppression, no inequality of any social or economic type, total equity for everyone living within it. While that is a great idea on paper, it is a utopian fairy tale. First, inequality is if not the primary driver of motivation, innovation, and success on a psychological level. Granted, the inequality has to be mountable. Incredible inequality is the driver for pain, suffering, violence, and many other things. Forcing equity, which is equal outcome, in a society requires the removal of freedom. When people are able to make decisions for themselves as adults, not everyone will make good decisions. Not everyone will make the same decisions or want the same things. The outcome of this is that some people spend their lives doing nothing, and others spend every minute of their lives grinding for money. While some are grinding for money, others are creating music, writing books, making art, with wealth not being a driving factor. Or other people value their family above all else. So maybe they live in a small house or a trailer on some land and both parents work a part-time job so they can spend time with their kids. Everyone has different values, which is going to lead to inequality of various different types. None of this is to say that there is no room in capitalist societies for improvement. Some of the ideas behind socialism are great, and Marx was a great writer. He was a political philosopher. I think he created one of the most fundamentally flawed and damaging philosophies possible. But there is substance in there that is actually good. For example, now he didn't say this because this wasn't necessarily a thing back then, but this is one of his principles in action in modern time today. Redistributing some of the wealth to help fund healthcare for everyone is a good and reasonable and achievable idea. The same goes for education. The issue comes when that idea is pushed to the extreme, and the kulaks are a great example of what this looks like. The kulaks were rather successful farmers. They owned lots of property, had many employees, and had a lot of food. When the revolution came around, they were seen as the oppressors because of the success they had achieved. There was no room for hungry capitalist oppressors in the USSR, so the government kidnapped most, if not all of them, and dumped them in Siberia where they all froze to death and died. And maybe some went into the gulag system, but the majority were dumped in the tundra. The government then seized their property and the means of distribution and gave it to the workers, quote unquote. Unfortunately, these workers were not as skilled as farmers, and this led to widespread famine that ended up killing around 6 million Ukrainians. This, akin to Nazism in its extremism and depravity, is what happens when the class struggle ideology is pushed to its limits. People who are better at farming tend to become successful, or at least more successful than people who aren't, from their skills. If that result is removed and the skilled farmers have to live in the same shared housing, earning the same allotment of food, assuming the allotment actually exists, having the same ultimate wealth as the unskilled farmers, what is the point of becoming skilled at anything in the first place? That system doesn't work. And since it didn't work, the USSR was forced to build their country off of slave labor. The only way they could obtain enough slaves to do this was through arresting virtually everyone for anything possible. It is true that the USSR became quite the world superpower after the revolution. It was absolutely successful in that regard. But again, it was only successful because of slave labor. Without the Gulag system, the USSR doesn't achieve nearly the amount it did. An example of how twisted this became is that people who were arrested for murder and rape and other violent crimes were seen as less dangerous to society than people who committed political crimes, like criticizing Stalin, visiting a capitalist country, reading a Western book, saying that they were hungry, who could be hungry in a utopian socialist paradise, etc. So much so that the murderers and rapists were the prison guards. After all, the only reason they were driven to behave in that way was due to the economic oppression caused by Tsarist Russia. If they would have been in the Soviet paradise, they would have never done those things. But people willing to criticize the USSR or say that they aren't perfectly happy are in a paradise and they're criticizing it. They are wreckers attempting to destroy society. That rhetoric of opposition attempting to destroy society will never go away, and it is always used by governments like this. We need to be really careful about how often we spread that claim and that idea. These wreckers and political criminals were so dangerous that the violent criminals in the prison were asked to keep them in check. So, where should the left draw the line exactly on this type of ideology? As I said, there is some validity to it, which is what gives Marxism legs, aside from the quasi religiosity of it. Advocating for publicly funded healthcare and education is not a step over the line, in my opinion. The line should be drawn when people on the left attribute every single issue in society to class struggle or when they begin advocating for equity. That is where the problems begin to rise. Let's think about the equity problem a little bit more. Marx and a growing number of people on the left attribute any amount of inequality to societal issues. That is such a horrendous mischaracterization that it undermines every single thing built on top of it. The philosophy isn't built on sand, it's built on water. Inequality is present all throughout the natural world. It is not just a human thing. It is certainly not just a societal thing. A small portion of chimps within chimp society receive most of the attention from the females. Societal hierarchies and the natural inequality that comes from them is such an ancient biological mechanism that virtually every animal species that is social on the planet experiences it. For a society to function, a hierarchy is required. There is a leader or group of leaders, and historically and in the natural world, those leaders receive a hell of a lot more luxury than the people they are leading. Good leaders are able to distribute the luxuries to their people to keep the society happy and running. This is also true in chimps. It has been shown repeatedly that if a chimp leader rules by power and tyranny, like fighting other chimps constantly, hoarding the food, stealing all the mates, they die violent deaths very young. On the other hand, when a chimp leader shares and doesn't rule violently, they live longer and are not typically overthrown violently. These things are natural to a point that they are embedded within our biological systems, not just our psychological ones. This needs to be expanded to other topics as well. A small percentage of authors have most of the best-selling books. Same with musicians, same with artists. Jordan Peterson made a great observation on this side of it on one of his podcast episodes. Even the art made by these people experience this. Stephen King has written over 50 books. Only a few of them are widely famous. The rest are only known by avid readers or his fans. This collection of success falling into the hands of a select few is a natural outcome of freedom. Preventing that or forcibly rearranging it is the enemy of freedom. This is completely missed in Marxism, and the fact that it is missed gives people an enemy. Inequality is unavoidable in a free society. A small amount of inequality may even be necessary for society to improve. Attempting to remove all inequality with the idea that one, inequality is a result of human society and capitalism rather than nature, and two, that most, if not all, of society's problems are caused by inequality, is a road to a hellish tyranny that has never been experienced in the US. Something else that the Marxists miss, and I'm going off script, so I may ramble a little bit here, but is that they don't acknowledge that power is not the most effective way to lead. Their entire philosophy is based off the idea that the people who have the most power are oppressing the people below them, and that all issues arise from that. It's like, well, like I showed even with chimps, power is not the most effective way to lead. And we are in a point in society where power almost isn't even considered when we're electing our leaders. We're looking at their intelligence, we're looking at their ability to problem solve, we're looking at their ability to handle finances and improve the economy and provide us with comfortable and easy living, essentially. Like we look up to them to not start civil wars and to not cause insane civil unrest, right? So that's another thing that they miss. They don't acknowledge that power is not the primary determining factor for getting into positions of power. And I think that that is also something that needs to be addressed when we're talking about these sort of ideologies. And instead of having to come up with rational explanations for various forms of inequality existing, this gives people an easy and cheap way out. Now they can just point at the wealthy and blame them. They don't have to offer any actual solutions. It's just that we need to eat the rich. It's just that we need higher taxes. Of course, that's operating off of the assumption that the government will be effective at redistributing the wealth in this way and not just collapse into a hole of corruption. And if we do that, there will be less crime and less suffering, even though every single time this has been attempted, the opposite of that has taken place. The next line that leftists and right wingers both need to draw is violence. Political violence is the hallmark of political extremism on either side. And it's not necessarily just an end stage thing. The USSR, the Cambodian communists, Nazi Germany, Maoist China, it doesn't matter. Where extremism is pushed to its limit, violence is always present. The indifference I've seen toward political violence in recent months is as, if not more, concerning than Trump trying to change the election and liberals harping on equity and class struggle politics combined. The reason being, we have already shown that we are crossing into extremism in growing numbers, and now we are showing that we won't shy away from the violence required to establish it. This indifference does indeed come from both sides as well. I know that after the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the church shooting, most of the indifference or celebration has come from the left. However, there was celebration and indifference about the Democrat lawmakers. There was certainly celebration about the attempt on Nancy Pelosi's husband. This is also not a one-sided issue. However, it is important to be honest here about what's taking place, and it is certainly more present on the left at this time. Granted, just because it's more present or prevalent on that side doesn't make the presence of it on the right any less abhorrent and concerning. I didn't see any videos of people standing outside of Nancy Pelosi's house with signs celebrating the attempt like I did the church where a trans person shot and killed multiple children. Nor did I see TikToks of people singing, dancing, and genuinely celebrating like we have seen with Charlie Kirk's death. The line against political violence needs to be drawn, and now, on both sides. Now, there's another facet to this issue, and it's the inability of the left and the right to delineate between extremists on the opposing side. I talked about this in my political violence podcast. It is not hard to find thousands of examples of people on the left calling anyone who voted for Trump or anyone that holds any conservative values a Nazi. It is also not hard to find thousands of examples of people on the right accusing all liberals of being communist baby killers. Nazism and communism should be viewed as equally evil, depraved, and disgusting political philosophies. Calling someone a communist is as insulting as calling someone a Nazi. Being a communist and advocating for communism is as depraved as advocating for Nazism. Let's not forget that the deaths caused by communist revolutions and policies outnumber the deaths of the Holocaust multiple times. It isn't just the right that needs to be able to draw the line on right wing extremism. The left also needs to be able to accurately determine when someone has crossed that line and when they haven't. If you want to say that Trump crossed the line with his call to Georgia electors, I would agree and have no problem with it. However, there is also a clear and major difference between saying you have crossed this line into extremism and you need to walk that back immediately and calling someone a Nazi or Hitler. Let's just remind ourselves that Hitler is not known as one of history's most evil men because he tried to change the results of an election. He has that title because he exterminated 7 million people by hoarding them into gas chambers or shooting them in the street. Trump has not approached that, even once. However, he did cross the extremism line, according to me. That shouldn't be forgivable. And the reason is because continuous forgiveness of these infractions will inevitably lead to something more serious. Our country is polarizing and radicalizing. Both sides have crossed the line I consider concerning. Neither side seems willing to separate themselves from the extremists within. Perhaps that will change in light of this recent assassination. I think the footage of it is playing a huge psychological role in the way people have reacted to it. If there was that type of footage from Sandy Hook or Uvalde, I think the reaction to those events would have been 100 times worse than what they were. I'm meaning like close up graphic videos of it. Because how would it not be 100 times worse? I think if even that close up video of Charlie, where you actually see the see the collision with his throat, like if that video wasn't online, I don't think the reaction would be as severe, just because of how disturbing and appalling that video is. And I think if that was the case with these school shootings, we would never get over it. Anyone with a soul would never get over seeing a video like that. I don't know how you could. And so I hope that Charlie's death is a turning point in our country for the positive and not the negative. I hope that people see that footage and think it's time to draw some lines and not it's time to draw some guns. I also sincerely hope that the line is not just drawn at the violence and that we can identify the other problems laid out here. I find myself entirely politically isolated, not only because I'm a drug legalization advocate, which is undeniably a big part of it, but also because I see both sides racing to cross over into extremism, or at the very least, allowing the crossover to happen without serious backlash and ostracization taking place. I hope that our country can right the path. I hope we can find uniting principles that put an end to this radicalization and polarization as soon as possible. But it is known that the only way to ever feel disappointment is to first hope. Regardless, here's to hoping. So that will do it for the scripted part of this. And I think this is going to be the format of the podcast going forward when it's just me. I do plan on getting some guests on soon, including my mom, which is going to be fun and interesting. I wouldn't necessarily consider her a politically active minded or philosophical person, politically, but she's an intelligent person and she's articulate. She has a good voice, so I think it'll be an interesting podcast talking to her. But I like this format of I write a script out because writing is really the best way to learn anything, and it's certainly the best way to teach people things. Even if they're not like a visual learner, but like you writing allows you to really work through the ideas before you say them. That's one of the issues that I think a lot of these live streaming political commentators have, and I'll eventually live stream some stuff, particularly if I get any debates lined out. But I think one of the issues is that, especially when you got 60,000 people watching or some crazy amount of people watching and you're getting to see the reactions on your screen when you say stuff, you just kind of start like building upon the things you've said until you say something just fucking absurd. And then you get mixed reactions and you kind of dial it back, and you go through this cycle of not having enough time to work through your thoughts when you're talking about complex issues. And I think a lot of the trouble that you've seen these like live stream political commentators get into is because of something of that nature. Whether it's they got something just completely wrong and are being accused of misleading people or lying, or whether they said something just stupid. I think writing these things out really helps you learn about it. Even if you're not like doing new research, that's not the only way to learn. Just writing your ideas can really help you investigate them. And so I'm going to keep the scripted part around, and I think I'm going to keep this sort of rambling at the end around as well, just to make the podcast feel a little free flowing and conversational rather than just someone reading a book to you. So I'm going to keep the unscripted section of this one a little short, just because I don't want to like ramble about nothing. But there's something that keeps coming to mind, and I've been trying to work it into the script of the last two podcasts in some way, but I just wasn't able to, so I'm just going to talk about it now. And it revolves around Trump's opponents comparing his use of ICE to Gestapo. I think that is a nonsense comparison, and I think it does disservice to the people who were tortured and suffered due to Gestapo, because the reason they're using Gestapo as the example is because of the horrendous things that the Gestapo force did. And none of those things are happening now. And this hyperbole and complete inability to criticize Trump or have a conversation about Trump without lying like this or being intellectually dishonest or just hyperbolizing to a stupid degree is part of the reason this polarization is taking place. Because if you see someone say that, like if you're a liberal and I'm like, oh man, Kamala Harris is just a communist baby killer. She wants to usher in the USSR and the United States. Like if I'm saying these hyperbolic things that are clearly not true, you won't engage with me. Why would you? It would be a complete waste of time. Like you are letting me know immediately that interacting with you about ICE and how it's being used is a waste of time when you compare it to the Gestapo. And so this hyperbole just causes more of the problem that you are complaining about. The reason ICE is being used in this way is due to radicalizing policies from the right, and it is due to the consensus agreement among the right that something drastic had to be done about illegal immigration. And we can have a whole conversation about how we got to this point regarding that topic. That's for a different time. But my point is that this did not happen in a vacuum. And you are contributing more to it when you are saying hyperbolic things like that, because it just eliminates the possibility for reasonable discourse about the topic. And the thing that really irks me is that no one has said a fucking word about SWAT teams breaking into houses, pointing guns at children, yanking people out of bed at 2 in the morning and throwing them in the car over the search of inanimate molecules. Most of those people, 40 to 60,000 houses a year are broken into by SWAT teams. Most of those are in search of drugs, and most of those are in search of cannabis. And it has increased dramatically since the year 2000. It has only gotten worse and worse and worse. And the reason for that is, fentanyl has scared the shit out of people, and rightfully so. But fentanyl is a product of prohibition and nothing more. And perhaps my next episode will go into drug policy a little bit, since that is my area of expertise. But they are using fentanyl and the fear it causes as an excuse to dramatically increase these house break ins. And none of these people talking about ICE being Gestapo has said anything about that. So these people need to make a decision. Are we opposed to clear infractions of our government and invading our personal liberty in a militarized way. When SWAT breaks into your house, they have submachine guns, assault rifles, they have weapons that are designed to be in combat when they are breaking into your home searching for drugs. And if a kid runs out of a room, your child's going to have a gun pointed at their face with a flashlight blinding them. They're going to be screaming at your kids. They're going to be ransacking your house. They're going to be tearing everything up, looking for some molecules. And then they're going to arrest you and potentially destroy your entire life. Where is the outrage about that from these people that are so opposed to this police force tyranny? The fact that they haven't said a word about that, and I'm hardly exaggerating when I say they haven't said a fucking word. You know, there are very few people talking about the tyranny that is drug prohibition and the way that it is carried out. And the number has been growing in recent years, but if you asked 10,000 of these people calling ICE Gestapo what they've said about SWAT teams breaking into houses in search of drugs over the past 5 years, I'd be surprised if one of them has said something. You know, they may say they disagree with it or that drugs should be decriminalized, which is kind of becoming a more popular thing on the left, which is a dumbass idea. Drug decriminalization is awful. It's worse than prohibition, if you ask me. Okay. And they may say stuff like that, but I guarantee you none of them are comparing it to the Soviet like police force being tyrannical or the Gestapo or anything like that. And it's that philosophical inconsistency and intellectual dishonesty that really drives me crazy. Because not only is that hyperbole completely eliminating the chance for discourse, but it is also a clear indication that you are only saying this because you're opposed to Trump and are looking for any opportunity to paint him as a tyrant. So I've been trying to find a way to work that in to these past two podcasts, and I wasn't able to in the script. So I'm glad I covered it right there. And I'll try to get another script written. It'll probably be about drug policy, and I'll get it out tomorrow. So again, thank you all for stopping by and listening, and please like, subscribe, leave a comment. I'll reply to every comment. We can have a 5-hour discussion in the comments if you'd like. That is encouraged. So thank you guys all again, and we'll see you next time.